some comments and things coming out just prior to a coach hitting the podium. Of course, Ryan Day was on day 1, I believe. It's tough to think back that far, but anyway, at whatever point Ryan Day hit the podium, Steve, if you recall, that morning, Ryan Day was on one of the early morning ESPN shows. He was asked about Michigan and about the expectations.
With my unruly dogs.
Okay. So I will set up the rest of the conversation here. So Ryan Day's on one of the ESPN morning shows. He's asked about the typical Michigan and expectations and so forth. Ryan Day gives a reasonable answer as it being a must-win situation. This is unacceptable. We have to win that game. Typical stuff. Paul Finebaum jumps on and responds. He was asked to respond to Ryan Day's comment. He, in fact, responded to Ryan Day's job resume and went on and on and on and on about Ryan Day's excuses, and this is unacceptable, and this is not good enough. So, Steve, I don't know if you're with me at this point.
You were saying something about Ryan Day the first day.
So, yes. So before Ryan Day hit the podium at Big Ten Media Days, he was on one of the ESPN morning shows.
Yeah.
And he was asked the typical national type questions. You got to beat Michigan, what the high expectations, etc. Ryan Day gave very reasonable comments. We have to win that game. It's a must win at Ohio State. We have big expectations, all the standard stuff. Paul Finebaum was then asked to respond to Ryan Day's comment. Paul Finebaum proceeded not to respond to Day's comment, but just to rake him over the coals that he has this glossy record, but he doesn't win any big games and he can't beat Michigan and blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, what Ryan Day had to say was extremely reasonable in terms of this is the biggest game of the year. We know at Ohio State, we have to win this game. We have to win every game. We have to win national championships. That's what we're here to do. We've fallen short. It's unacceptable. He was completely accountable. Finebaum rakes him over the coals. Ryan Day can't do anything about any of these things right now in July. So Finebaum's ripping Ryan Day for, he's making excuses and why doesn't he do something about this? And he's got to beat Michigan. Well, he can't beat Michigan today. He can't do that. He can't correct. He can't do anything about the last 3 years today.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know why. I think Paul Finebaum's thing is just say something, I had a columnist that worked for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He and his buddy that worked for the Minneapolis Star Tribune, they would get together and one of their lines was, if you can't figure out what to say, just rip them. And, that's, I don't know, that to me kind of sounds like what happened here is that Day was just being kind of realistic that, yeah, we got to do better. What else do you want somebody to say? They take it seriously. They've tried to address whatever issues they thought were their shortcomings to the best of their ability. And that's all you can do in the situation as a coach. I lived through the Cooper years where they were 10-2-1 or whatever it was against Michigan. And, believe me, they showed up every year trying to win that game. They just never could. And here's Ryan Day. He's won 88% of his games. He's 56-8, gone 11-2, 3 straight years. They've beaten everybody else, but, the three of the 6 losses are to Michigan. And, 1 to Missouri, 1 to Georgia there in the playoff, and another one regular season to Oregon. So those are the 6, I guess there'd be 8 losses in there. Clemson in the playoff as well.
Alabama national
championship blotted from my memory. So there you go. So they haven't lost to rum-dum teams. I don't think you'd qualify many or any of those as upsets. Given the tenor of the day. I think Oregon and Ohio State was somewhat of an upset. Ohio State was probably a 10-point favorite that day, but Oregon just came in and whacked them pretty good. So, people ask me, is he on the hot seat if he loses to Michigan? I'm like, well, he's got probably a $50 million buyout after this season. They have the number one recruiting class in the country. I don't foresee them losing to Michigan this season. I just don't even know how that would be possible with the game in Columbus and Michigan only having 4 starters returning and Ohio State having all these seniors who are playing and all of them burning for a chance to beat Michigan. Ohio State would have to commit 3 turnovers and really help them out probably to allow something like that to happen. We'll see how the season unfolds for both teams. Maybe Michigan's the undefeated team and Ohio State's the 3-loss team. Who the heck knows? But it doesn't seem likely to me. I think the roles are going to be reversed. So to me, the criticism is unwarranted. I don't know, again, what else is the guy supposed to do? He's had his team in position to win national championships almost every year he's been there. And, for whatever reason, they haven't gotten over that hump. And obviously, they lost 2 semifinals in controversial fashion, one to Clemson and one to Georgia, and then got whacked pretty bad by Alabama in the one national championship game they've been to. I mean, he's had a pretty good run in 5 years, and, I think people are asked to see what happens the next 5.
Absolutely. That's how I see it as well. Absolutely. I hear from time to time various people conjecture about there being a culture problem at Ohio State, or that last year's team, there was a culture problem. And my conclusion, Steve, is that if a team comes within 30 or 35 yards, one completion of winning all of its games and being the number 1 seed in the playoffs, which of course they would have been had they completed one more pass against Michigan, they would have been the number 1 seed in the college football playoff, undefeated. That if they're that close to being a national championship contender and playing in the playoffs as the number 1 seed, and they've got a culture problem, then they must have a hell of a team. They must be super talented. They must be better than everybody else if they can have a culture problem and come within 35 yards of being the number 1 seed at undefeated in the playoffs.
Yeah, the whole thing is kind of staggering when you think about it. Even simpler than that, if coming off the end zone in the early portion of the game, if McCord doesn't throw a pick there and Michigan punches that in, I mean, that's a 7-point play right there that the offense gave them. So it was I will give Michigan full credit. I mean, the game at Ann Arbor, they out-toughed Ohio State and, ran the football extremely well. The game in Columbus got away from Ohio State in the third and fourth quarter. It was a close game, and Michigan made all the plays, just a ton of big plays, obviously, and swarmed Ohio State under. And again, last year they ran the ball effectively. The team that runs the ball more effectively is going to win that game, almost 99 times out of 100. So there have been a few exceptions over the years, but it's very, very few and far between. So to me, that's when Ryan Day, as he talks about it, he goes, I'm not going to get into specific issues, but we have tried to deal with what we think the root causes are and correct those in the offseason program through recruiting and, adding transfers and, anything they can do to upgrade the Ohio State football program, they've done it. So I think you have to give them credit for, recognizing, hey, there are a few things that we do really well, and we're going to continue to accentuate those positives and eliminate the negatives and work on those negatives that have held them back. He doesn't like to talk about, the specifics of that. But, I mean, it's obvious. You got to stop the run. You got to establish the run. You got to protect the quarterback. Those are kind of the 3 things that really they haven't done in any of the last 3 games against the University of Michigan. And they've got to get back to doing all of that this season. It's not just against Michigan. They're going to have to do that when they go on the road at Oregon. If they can go out there and establish the run and take the crowd out of the game with a ball control type offense that's efficient, puts the ball in the end zone, going into the really tough place to play, Autzen Stadium, is not going to seem quite as difficult. So to me, I think that, the proof will be in the pudding. We won't know for a few weeks. Obviously, they play Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, at Michigan State. It's kind of a soft launch to the season. Then back home with Iowa, and then at Oregon. That, weeks 5 and 6 are where the rubber really begins to hit the road for Ohio State this coming season. So, and then they'll get a bye week after that, and then play the last 6 weeks in a row. So, to me, that's where we're going to really find out what this team's made of.
What were your impressions of whether it be Ryan Day or the 3 players at Big Ten Media Days? Because they seem to be very much on point. And I'm not saying that they didn't individually speak for themselves, meaning Jack Sawyer, Emeka Egbuka, and Denzel Burke, especially Denzel Burke, an extremely confident individual. I'm the number 1 cornerback in the country. We're not just going to win a national championship. We're going to dominate people every week. Very interesting contradiction in the soft-spokenness of Denzel Burke, but the vibrato that's stated when it comes out of his mouth. But they all seem to be on point as to why they came back, and that's to win it all.
Yeah, that was a recurring message, I think, from Jack Sawyer, Emeka Egbuka, and Denzel Burke. And Denzel Burke was, I didn't come back for any BS, none of this messing around stuff. Came back to beat Michigan, win the national championship. And those are the 2 overarching goals. I want to win the Big Ten as well. Obviously, that's something that Ohio State needs to do on a regular basis. But Ohio State was starting to kind of reel Michigan in terms of Big Tens and also head-to-head wins. But Michigan 3 in a row has kind of widen that gap back out again as the best in the Big Ten historically, I guess we'll put it that way. In modern era, maybe not quite that way. But as my buddy said, we were sitting there at lunch, he goes, for everything they talk about, Ohio State still won 16 of the last 20 games. So, as bad as it may seem, there is still the idea that they're going to get it turned back around in their favor. And they have history to kind of point to, at least recent history, to say, one is greater than the other in typical fashion. So we'll see how that plays out. But I think that Day and the players were, matter of fact, they were businesslike, said they put all the preparation in that they possibly could. And they are ready to now get into preseason camp and then attack the schedule 1 game at a time. And I think that Jack Sawyer outlined how he was probably the first 4th-year senior who decided to come back and pass up the draft. And then he tried to lobby as many of his classmates as possible. They were the number 2 recruiting class in the country in 2021. Feel like they've let down Buckeye Nation because they haven't beaten Michigan, haven't won the Big Ten, haven't won a national championship, and believe that they have unfinished business. Emeka Egbuka, it sounds like he is healthy, and that is a bad thing, I think, for the Big Ten because he dealt with an ankle injury last year that kind of limited his effectiveness and limited his availability at times. And certainly Marvin Harrison Jr. is gone. Julian Fleming, the other starter, is gone. He'll be playing at Penn State this year, back in his home state of Pennsylvania. And now Emeka Egbuka needs to bring along the young receivers, Carnell Tate, Brandon Ennis, and certainly the true freshman, Jeremiah Smith. It sounds like Jeremiah Smith is going to be the clear number 2 guy going into the start of the season. So that was kind of some of the upshot I think we got from those players. And then talking to Denzel Burke, as you said, he is sold on how good the defense can be. I think that there was a time back in the spring when somebody asked him about Will Howard, and he was like, I haven't really seen it yet out of the quarterback on the other side of the ball, the guy coming in from Kansas State. And he said during the summer and everything else, he says, I'm starting to see a little bit of the dog in him. So he's coming around a little bit on Will Howard. I thought that was good. And obviously he is high on the rest of his secondary mates when you're talking about Hancock and Davison Igbinosun at the corners, Lathan Ransom and the Alabama transfer, Caleb Downs at safety, Malik Hartford also there at safety. So Jermaine Matthews, another option at corner. So you got a lot of great things happening in the secondary. Some people think it's the best secondary Ohio State's had in a few years. And boy, what would that mean? If you get the pass rush up front, the coverage on the back, going to be hard for teams to move the football.